Hi, today we're going to stick with our lessons on solving equations. Remember that we learned that the basis of solving equations are those four properties of equality, the addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division property of equality, which says that what you do to one side or what operation you perform to one side of an equation, you must perform to the other in order to maintain an equality of your expressions on either side. Well, today we're going to focus on writing and solving equations that involve percents. And we're going to focus on two methods. There are two methods for solving and writing equations involving percents. We're going to talk about both of them today. The first one we're going to call the percent proportion method. The percent proportion method. And this involves setting up a proportion, which is just nothing more than two equal fractions. And the other method we're going to call the keyword equation method. All right, and this one involves setting up an equation using those keywords that we talked about when we were learning how to translate equations and expressions. So let's first talk about the percent proportion method. The percent proportion method involves us setting up a proportion. And a proportion in general looks something like this. A over B equals C over D. So you have some fraction equals some fraction. All right, one of these fractions, let's call it the first fraction. This is going to be our percent fraction, and the other one is going to be our part over the whole. So maybe it looks like this. Remember that the word percent means out of 100. So the first fraction is going to be whatever the percent is over 100. And that's going to be equal to part of some number over the whole of some number. All right. So let's take a look at maybe the first example here. Here's my question, what is 195% of 151? All right, well, let's talk for a second. We're going to take the percent 195, and we're going to express that in our first fraction as 195 over 100. Okay, so our first fraction, or the first part of our proportion, is going to be 195 over 100. Now, the other number that we're working with, we have to decide, so 151, we have to decide if that is part of some other number, or is that the whole number that we're trying to find part of? Let me give you a hint. All right, so if you see the word of in here, or of 151, that's going to indicate that this is the whole. Okay, so this is the whole number. So down in the bottom part of our fraction, we're going to put 151. Now, the part of the fraction is the unknown. So we're going to call that x. That's our unknown, and we're going to call that x. Now, how do you solve an equation that's a proportion? Well, let me explain. If things are proportional, then their cross products are equal. Let's say that again. If things are proportional, like this, then their cross products are equal. So remember, product means multiplication. And when we say cross products, what we mean are what we get when we multiply across the proportion. So let's start here. 100 times x is 100x. And when we cross multiply the other side, we get 195 times 151. That's 29,445. And I said earlier that if they are proportional, which they are in this case, their cross products are equal to one another. So we're going to make the equal sign in between them. And we have a very simple equation to solve for x. 100x means 100 times x. We're going to go ahead and divide both sides by 100. Divide both sides by 100, and we get 294.45. 294.45. So, what is 195% of 151? Well, it's 294.45. 294.45. Now, notice 294.45 is larger than 151, right? Well, that kind of makes sense because we're looking for 195% of something, and that's 195% is more than 100%. In fact, it's almost 200%, which would be double that number. And double 151 is 302, so 294.45 seems to make sense. Let's take a look at a couple more, okay? Next question says, 101 is 340% of what? Okay, so again, where I like to start is with the percent, if I know the percent. So 340% would be 340 over 100. So remember, it's the percent over 100. Now, 101, is that the part or is that the whole? All right, well, let me give you a hint again. Remember how up above I said that the word of a number means a whole? Well, if you see the word is, that's the part, okay? So 101 is means that 101 is the part, and we are trying to find the whole. So the whole would be x. Remember cross multiply and set the cross products equal to one another. I always like to start with the one that has the x. So we start with 340x equals 101 times 100 is 10,100. Go ahead and divide both by 340 so that you can isolate that x. And it turns out, let's see, what do we get here? 10,100 divided by 340 is 29.71. 29.71. And I rounded there, 29.71. So 101 is 340% of 29.71. I want to do one more. Okay, I'll slide that down a bit. So remember, the first one we found the part. In the second one, we found the whole. And now in the third one, the question says, what percent of 41 is 37? What percent of 43 is 37? All right, so the unknown this time is the percent, right? So the 100 is always going to be on the bottom. Let's remember that. We always get something over 100. But the percent, the top part, that is our unknown this time. So we have x over 100 equals, okay, again, we have to decide those two numbers, right? There are those keywords of and is again. So of is the whole, that goes on the bottom, and is the part that goes on the top. So we have x over 100 equals 37 over 43. We're going to go ahead and we are going to cross multiply and set those cross products equal to one another. 43 times x is 43x, and 37 times 100 is 3,700. Divide both sides by 43 to isolate that x, and 3,700 divided by 43 is 86.05. So x equals 86.05. So 86, roughly 86%, 86% of 43 is 37. This, my friends, is called the percent proportion method. So again, we're setting up a proportion, which is a fraction equals a fraction. The first fraction is our percent fraction, and the second fraction is our part over whole. We looked at three different examples here. One where we found the part, one where we found the whole, and one where we found the percent. That's the percent proportion method. Now, the other method is called the keyword equation method. And the keyword equation method utilizes some of those keywords that you learned when we were talking about translating expressions. And when it comes to solving equations with percents, a couple keywords are more important. So, for example, the word of. Remember we talked about the word of before. The word of translates directly to multiplication. So, means times. And the word is, again, is one of those keywords that translates directly to equals. Okay, that translates directly to equals. What's nice about the keyword equation method is that the equation can be translated directly from the words, word for word, left to right. There is one skill that you need to know how to do in order to use this method. That skill is how to change a percent to a decimal. So change a percent to a decimal. And well, there are two ways you can think about this. You can take the percent and divide it by 100, or you can slide the decimal point over 2 places to the left. I like doing it that way. It's much easier. So slide decimal point 2 places left. 2 places left. And that's equivalent to dividing by 100. Now, if there is no decimal point, then you assume it's at the end, okay? Let's take a look and see how we would, and I'm going to go ahead and erase this, how we would translate this first equation directly to an equation. Oh, I forgot to mention earlier that another keyword that you might see, is the word what. Okay, what. And what is our variable? Right? That's our variable. We're gonna place a variable where we see the word what. All right, so we are literally going to read this left to right, and we're going to replace the word with something that is equivalent to it. So, for example, what. It starts with what. That's X. Is. Remember, is means equals 195%. So this is where we're going to change our percent to a decimal. Okay, 195%. Decimal point is at the end, so we're going to move it 2 places to the left, and we get 1.95. So what is 1.95 of, remember, of means times 151. So we're going to keep the 151 as 151. And so this is where we would hop on our calculator, right? In fact, our variable's already isolated. This makes our life so much easier. We have x equals 1.95 times 151. And if you do that multiplication, you get 294.45. 294.45, which was exactly what we got when we did the percent proportion method. You see it right there? So again, we read left to right. We replaced our keywords with a math operation or a variable, and we solved it for x. Let's take a look at the next one. All right, let me get rid of that. Let's try this one. 101 is 340% of what? All right, reading left to right. 101, so 101 is, remember that means equals 340%. Change that to a decimal, we get 3.40 of times what? That's our variable. So 101 equals 3.40 times x. This is a one-step equation that we need to isolate x. So we're going to undo the multiplication. We're going to divide both sides by 3.40. Divide both sides by 3.40. That's going to cancel that and cancel that. And we get for our solution 29.71 equals x. So there is our number. And if you notice, we get the same answer. Last one. Okay, last one. And this is the one, remember, that involved finding the percent. So we're going to say, what percent, okay, what percent, that's x, of times 43, x times 43 is equals 37. So what percent, that's our x, of times 43 is equals 37. So x times 43 equals 37. We're going to isolate x by dividing both sides by 43. Divide by 43. Bum, bum. And what we get is x equals, let's see, what is 37 divided by 43? It's 0.86. 0.86, and it's got a lot of decimals like 0.86046512, but we can stop there at x equals 0.86. Now, I want you to notice that when you're solving these problems, that's the decimal, what you get as the solution is the decimal equivalent to the percent, okay? So we need to change that back to a percent because the question asks us what percent. Now remember, before we said that to change a percent to a decimal, we slide the decimal point 2 places to the left. When we want to go the other way and change from a decimal to a percent, we slide the decimal point over 2 places to the right. So we get x equals 86%. 86%. And that's exactly what we got when we did it before. All right, so we looked at a few percent equations, setting them up and solving equations involving percent, and we looked at 2 different methods. We looked at the percent proportion method, and we looked at the keyword equation method. I'm going to have you practice both of these methods, and then ultimately you'll get a chance to decide which method you like better, and then you can use that from here on out anytime you have an equation that involves percents.